Chapter 27, Mike TV is sent by television. Mike TV was even more excited than Grandpa Joe at seeing a bar of chocolate sent by the television. But Mr. Wonka, he shouted, can you send other things through the air in the same way? Breakfast cereal, for instance? Oh, my sainted aunt, cried Mr. Wonka. Don't mention that disgusting stuff in front of me. Do you know what breakfast cereal is made of? It's made of those little curly wooden shavings you find in pencil sharpeners. But could you send it by television if you wanted to, as you do with chocolate, Mike TV asked. Of course I could. And what about people? Asked Mike TV. Could you send a real live person from one place to another in the same way? A person, cried Mr. Wonka. You are off your rocker. But could it be done? Good heavens, child, I really don't know. I suppose it could, yes. I'm pretty sure it could. Of course it could. I wouldn't like to risk it, though. It might have some very nasty results. But Mike TV was already off running. The moment he heard Mr. Wonka saying, I'm pretty sure it could, of course it could, he turned away and started running as fast as he could towards the other end of the room, where a great camera was standing. Look at me, he shouted as he ran. I'm going to be the first person in the world to be sent by television. No, 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 cried Mr. Wonka. Mike, screamed Mrs. TV. Stop, come back. You'll be turned into a million tiny pieces. But there was no stopping Mike TV now. The crazy boy rushed on, and when he reached the enormous camera, he jumped straight for the switch, scattering Oompa Loompas right and left as he went. See you later, alligator, he shouted. He pulled down the switch. As he did so, he leaped out into the full glare of the mighty lens. There was a blinding flash. Then there was silence. Then Mrs. TV ran forward, but stopped dead in the middle of the room, and she stood there. She stood there staring at the place where his son had been, and her great red mouth opened wide and screamed, He's gone! He's gone! Great heavens, he has gone, shouted Mr. TV. Mr. Wonka hurried forward and placed a hand gently on Mrs. TV's shoulder. We shall have to hope for the best, he said. We must pray that your little boy will come out unharmed at the other end. Mike, screamed Mrs. TV, clasping her hands and her head in her hand. Where are you? I'll tell you where he is, said Mr. TV. He's whizzing around above our heads in a million tiny pieces. Don't talk about it, wailed Mrs. TV. We must watch the television set, said Mr. Wonka. He may come through any moment. Mr. and Mrs. TV and Grandpa Joe and little Charlie and Mr. Wonka all gathered around the television and stared tensely at the screen. The screen was quite blank. He was taking a heck of a long time to come across, said Mr. TV, wiping his brow. Oh dear, said Mr. Wonka. I do hope that no parts of him get left behind. What on earth do you mean? Asked Mr. TV sharply. I don't wish to alarm you, said Mr. Wonka, but it does sometimes happen that only about half of the little pieces find their way into the television set. It happened last week. I don't know why, but the result was only half of a bar of chocolate came through. Mrs. TV let out a scream of horror. You mean only half of Mike is coming back, she cried. Let's hope it's the top half, said Mr. TV. Hold everything, said Mr. Wonka. Watch the screen. Something's happening. The screen had suddenly begun to flicker. Then some wavy lines appeared. Mr. Wonka adjusted one of the knobs on the way, and the wavy lines went away. And now very slowly the screen began to get brighter and brighter. Here he comes, yelled Mr. Wonka. Yes, that's him, all right. Is he all in one piece? Cried Mrs. TV. I'm not sure, Mr. Wonka said. It's too early to tell. Faintly at first, but becoming clearer and clearer every second, the picture of Mike TV appeared on the screen. He was standing up and waving at the audience, grinning from ear to ear. But he's a midget, shouted Mr. TV. Mike, cried Mrs. TV, are you all right? Are there any bits of you missing? Isn't he going to get bigger? Shouted Mr. TV. Talk to me, Mike, cried Mrs. TV. Say something. Tell me you're all right. A tiny little voice, no louder than a squeak of a mouse, came out of the television set. Hi, Mom, said. Hi, Pop. Look at me. I'm the first person to ever be sent by television. Grab him, ordered Mr. Wonka. Quick. Mrs. TV shot out a hand and picked the tiny figure of Mike TV out of the screen. Hooray, cried Mr. Wonka. He's all in one piece. He's completely unharmed. You can't call that unharmed, snapped Mrs. TV, peering down a little speck of a boy who was now running to and fro across the palm of her hand, waving a pistol in the air. He was certainly not more than an inch tall. He's shrunk, said Mr. TV. Of course he's shrunk, said Mr. Wonka. What do you expect? This is terrible, wailed Mrs. TV. What are we going to do? And Mr. TV said, we can't send him back to school like this. He'll get trod upon. He'll get squashed. He won't be able to do anything, cried Mrs. TV. "Oh, yes, I will," squeaked the tiny voice of Mike TV. "I'll be able to watch television." "Never again," shouted Mr. TV. "I'm throwing that television set out the window the moment we get home. I've had enough of television." When he heard this, Mike TV flew into a terrible tantrum. He started jumping up and down on the palms of his mother's hands, screaming and yelling, trying to bite her finger. "I want to watch television," he squeaked. "I want to watch television. I want to watch television. I want to watch television." "Here, give him to me," said Mr. TV. And he took the tiny boy and shoved him into his breast pocket of his jacket and stuffed a handkerchief on top of it. Squeals and yells came from inside the pocket, and the pocket shook as the little prisoner fought to get out. "Oh, Mr. Wonka," wailed Mrs. TV, "how can we make him grow?" "Well," said Mr. Wonka, stroking his beard, gazing thoughtfully at the ceiling, "I must say that's a wee bit tricky. But small boys are extremely springy and elastic. They stretch like mad. So what we'll do is we'll put him in a special machine I have for testing stretchiness of chewing gum. Maybe that will bring him back to what he was." "Oh, thank you," said Mrs. TV. "Don't mention it, my dear lady." "How far do you think he'll stretch?" asked Mr. TV. "Maybe miles," said Mr. Wonka. "Who knows? But he's going to be awfully thin. Everything gets thinner when it's stretched." "You mean like chewing gum?" asked Mr. TV. "Exactly." "How thin will he be?" asked Mrs. TV anxiously. "I haven't the foggiest idea," said Mr. Wonka. "And it doesn't really matter anyways, because we'll soon fatten him up again. And we'll just have to give him triple overdoses of my wonderful super vitamin candy. Super vitamin candy contains a huge amount of vitamin A, B, and also contains vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, F, G, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and believe it or not, vitamin Z. The only two vitamins it doesn't have are vitamin S, because that makes you sick, and vitamin H, because it makes you grow horns at the top of your head like a bull. But it doesn't have it in it does have in its very small amounts in the rarest and most magical vitamins of all, vitamin Wonka. "And what will that do to him?" asked Mr. TV anxiously. "It'll make his toes grow out until they are as long as his fingers." "Oh no," cried Mrs. TV. "Don't be silly," said Mr. Wonka. "It's most useful. He'll be able to play the piano with his feet." "But Mr. Wonka—" "No argument, please," said Mr. Wonka. He turned away and clicked his fingers 3 times in the air. An Oompa Loompa appeared immediately and stood beside him. "Follow these orders," said Mr. Wonka, handing the Oompa Loompa a piece of paper on which he had written the instructions. "And you'll find a boy in his father's pocket. Off you go. Goodbye, Mr. TV. Goodbye, Mrs. TV. And please don't look so worried. They'll all come out in the wash, every one of them." At the end of the room, the Oompa Loompas around the giant camera were already beating their tiny drums and beginning to jog up and down to the rhythm. "There they go again," said Mr. Wonka. "I'm afraid you can't stop them singing." Little Charlie caught Grandpa's hand, and the two of them stood beside Mr. Wonka in the middle of the long, bright room, listening to the Oompa Loompas. And this is what they sang. "The most important thing we've learned so far as children are concerned is never, never let them near your television set. Or better still, just don't install the idiotic thing at all. In almost every house we've been, we've watched them gaping at the screen. They'll loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. Last week in someone's place, we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. They sit and stare and stare and sit until they're hypnotized by it, until they're absolutely drunk with all the shocking, ghastly junk. Oh, yes, we know it will keep them still. They don't climb out the window sill. They never fight or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. But did you ever stop to think, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot? It rots the senses in the head. It kills the imagination dead. It clogs and clutters up the mind. It makes your child so dull and blind. He can no longer understand a fantasy fairyland. His brain becomes so soft as cheese. His powers of thinking rust and freeze. He can't think, he only sees. All right, you cry. All right, you'll say. But if you think to take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. We'll answer this by asking you what use the darling ones to do. How use they keep themselves content before the monstrous thing was invented. Have you ever forgotten? Don't you know? We'll say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They'd read and read and read and read, and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott, Gadzooks. One half of their lives was reading books. The nursery shelves held books galore. Books cluttered up the nursery floor. And in the bedroom by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. Such wondrous, fine, fantastic tales of dragons, gypsies, queens, and whales, and treasures, isles, and distant shores, where smugglers rowed with the muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple pants, and sailing ships, and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pot, stirring away at something hot. It smells so good, what can it be? Good gracious, it's Penelope. The younger one had Beatrix Potter, with Mr. Toad, the dirty rotter, and Squirrel Nutkins, Piglin Blands, and Mrs. Tiddlywinks, and just how the camel got his hump, and how the monkey lost its rump, and Mr. Toad and his blessed soul. There's Mr. Rat and Mrs. Mole. Oh, books, what books they used to know, those children living long ago. So please, oh please, we beg you, we pray, go throw your TV away, and in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. Then fill the shelves with lots of books, ignoring the dirty looks, the screams and yells and bites and kicks, and children hitting you with sticks. Fear not, because we promise you that in about a week or two, or having nothing else to do, they now will begin to feel the need of having something good to read. And once they start, oh boy, you watch them slowly growing joy. That fills their hearts. They grow so keen, they'll wonder what they've ever seen in that ridiculous machine, that nauseating soul, unclean, repulsive television screen. And later, each and every kid will love you more for what you did. P.S. Regarding Mike TV, we're very much to regret that we shall simply have to wait to see if he can get him back to his height. But if we can't, it serves him right.